What's up, AP Bio? All right, so today we are going to talk about some photosynthesis, guys. Hope you're doing well. Hope you're staying safe, and I hope that we can get past this virtual thing and get back to business as usual. So let's see if I can get everything to do what I needed to do. All right, so hopefully we can get it to connect and stay connected. All right, guys and girls, let's get ready to science. So we're going to talk about photosynthesis, okay? So this is Unit 3, Chapter 8. And before we even get into all of this, let's do a quick review of photosynthesis. We know that photosynthesis is an anabolic reaction, which means that something is being built up. And so we know with anabolic reactions, if we relate that to energy change, we know that that means that that is an endergonic reaction that is going to require the absorption of energy. So therefore, our change in free energy in a photosynthetic reaction should be greater than 0, or delta G will be positive. All right, so again, energy cannot be created nor destroyed. It can only be transferred or transformed. And what we'll see in photosynthesis, that this anabolic process actually does both. It transforms light energy into a form of chemical energy, and then it transfers that chemical energy from the molecules of food to the ATP molecule, which is typically the cell's energy shuttle. All right, so I'm gonna watch that. I'm gonna watch that. It's on the PowerPoint. Feel free to watch that. So photosynthesis converts solar energy to chemical energy. It can do directly or indirectly. It is going to nourish the entire living world. And what we mean by directly or indirectly, plants nourish themselves. That's why they're called autotrophs. And then other things eat the plants. Heterotrophs actually eat the plants, or you eat something that ate the plants. And so indirectly, you're receiving the energy that autotrophs were able to transform from solar energy to chemical energy. Almost all plants are what we call photoautotrophs, and photoautotrophs actually use the energy of sunlight to make organic materials. We do have these things called chemoautotrophs, and they don't use the energy from sunlight. They can use the energy from chemicals. All right, so photosynthesis can occur in plants, in algae, and some other unicellular eukaryotes and some prokaryotes, okay? So keep that in mind. The major organism that does photosynthesis, of course, is going to be plants and green algae. But we also have certain unicellular eukaryotes and some types of prokaryotes, which we know are those bacterial cells that can actually do photosynthesis, okay? Now, photosynthesis converts light energy to the chemical energy stored in food. The organelle where this occurs is called chloroplast. Chloroplasts are structurally similar and have likely evolved from bacteria, photosynthetic bacteria. The cyanobacteria is the bacteria is believed that, ancestors of the cyanobacteria are believed to be the photosynthetic bacteria that participated in the endosymbiosis that ultimately ended up in the production of chloroplasts. We talked about this last unit. Some of the things that support this theory are the double membrane, so it's kind of like a cell in a cell. Also, chloroplast has its own genetic material. It has its own DNA, and that DNA is found in a circular chromosome, like the chromosomes found in prokaryotes, whereas the rest of the cell, with the exception of mitochondria, because mitochondria and chloroplast both follow this rule, the rest of the cell, the chromosomes are linear. And also the ribosomes that are found in chloroplasts and mitochondria are similar in size to the ribosomes that we see in prokaryotes, not the ribosomes that you will see throughout the rest of the cell. All right, so the structural organization of the organelles allow for the chemical process of photosynthesis. Now, of course, I just pointed out the two membranes, so it is a double membrane enclosed organelle, but it also has a third membrane system. So when we think about chloroplasts, so you have the outer membrane, so this is going to be the outer. Then you have the inner membrane. And in here you have the inner membrane space. So this is the space between the inner and outer membrane. But there's also a third membrane system. That third membrane system is composed of these stacks of thylakoids. So one of these, so if I was to circle one of these, this one thing right here is called a thylakoid. But if I was to look at the entire stack, so this entire stack would be grana. Now, the thylakoids are inside of the chloroplasts, and there's also this fluid. There's this dense liquid-like fluid that's also in here, and that fluid is called stroma. Now, these two areas, or the structure in the area are extremely important in this organelle because they organize the locations of photosynthesis. So the light-dependent reaction, or LDR, the light-dependent reaction occurs in the thylakoid. And it's the structure of the thylakoid that allows it to happen. Remember, structure dictates function. And so the light-independent reaction, also known as the Calvin cycle, occurs in the stroma, okay? So these areas inside of chloroplasts are extremely important. And so you also need to make sure you understand where photosynthesis occurs. So it occurs in chloroplasts, yes, go deeper. It occurs inside the chloroplast, yes, go deeper. So inside of the chloroplast, there's this area called the stroma and this molecule called the thylakoid. So the light-dependent reaction happens in the thylakoid and the Calvin cycle happens in the stroma. Guess what? We can even go deeper. We can break down this thylakoid and we can talk specifically about what's going on with the light-dependent reaction with regards to the structure of the thylakoid, because we know the theme of biology is that structure dictates function. All right, so let's go back to the PowerPoint. All right, so chloroplasts are the sites of photosynthesis. So leaves are going to be the major location of photosynthesis. So leaves of plants are the major organs. You can pretty much tell where a chloroplast is located in the plant because that part of the plant is going to appear green. That part of the plant is also going to be exposed to sunlight. So you would not expect to find chloroplasts in the roots of a plant because the roots, one, are typically underground, and two, they don't look green. So you know that there should not be any chloroplasts there. All right. When you think about the leaf is actually, let's look at the structure of the leaf. All right, so here we have the structure of the leaf. You have the upper epidermis and the lower epidermis. So if you think about with us, our skin is the epidermis, right? So leaves have an epidermis. They have the upper epidermis and a lower epidermis. If you were to actually examine a leaf, you'll notice a waxy-like substance. That is a lipid, that's wax, and it actually helps to prevent water loss in plants. Now, below the epidermis, inside of the leaf, you have two layers. You have the mesophyll layer and you have the palisade layer of cells. Most chloroplasts is mainly in the cells of the mesophyll. That's the interior tissue of the leaf. Each mesophyll cell can contain about 30 to 40 chloroplasts. So again, you have two layers, two different types of cells. You have the mesophyll, which is where most chloroplast is going to be found. So that's going to be 30 to 40 chloroplasts per cell. in the mesophyll layer. And remember, when cells work together, it makes tissues. So when you see the tissue layer, that's just talking about a group of cells. And also you have the palisades layer. Now, if you notice here, you see this purple thing? This is actually vascular tissue, okay? Vascular tissue, like we have vascular tissue, is used for transport within the organism. Okay, we call our vascular tissues veins and arteries, but in plants, the vascular tissues are called xylem and phloem, okay? So in plants, the vascular tissue are xylem and phloem. And if you can remember, xy goes high and phlo goes low. All right, so xylem's job is to bring water from the roots to the leaves of the plants, because the leaves, of course, is where we have this chloroplast, and the leaves is where we're going to need the water to perform photosynthesis. And then the phloem actually takes the organic materials that are created during photosynthesis to the rest of the plant. And so since the leaves are high up, we said phlo goes low, because it takes that organic material from the leaves down through the rest of the plant. So this purple is representing the vascular tissue in leaves. Now, below that, we're going to have the lower epidermis. And in the lower epidermis, in most plants, what we typically see on the bottom in the lower epidermis, we'll see these things called stoma. Stoma, not to be confused with stroma. Stoma is like the nose of the plant. And why do I call it the nose of the plant? What do we use our noses for? We use it for gas exchange. We breathe in oxygen and we breathe out carbon dioxide. The stoma of a plant can also be called stomata. You know, one word singular, one word plural. But the stoma of the plant does the same for the plant. It participates in gas exchange. Now, they're called guard cells because they can open and close to control that gas exchange. So the main gases that we're going to see being exchanged is when the stroma allows carbon dioxide to enter the plant and oxygen to leave. But a third gas can also exit through the stroma, and that is water vapor. So that's why the stoma, I said stroma, I meant stoma. That's why the stoma has to be able to open and close. That's one of the reasons. It also needs to be able to control carbon dioxide seeping out and stuff like that. But one of the main reasons is to control the loss of water in the plant through transpiration, okay? Now, inside of the chloroplast, there are pigments, and pigments are molecules that absorb different wavelengths of light. One of the main pigments, there's more than one type of pigment, but one of the main pigments found in chloroplast is going to be chlorophyll. All right, now, when we think about the reaction of photosynthesis, let's look at a simplified chemical equation. So we know reactants are the things that you need to get going and to get a reaction going. So they're what you start with. Products are what you create during that reaction. Now, we simplify the equation. The overall equation, you're going to have 12 water molecules, 6 carbon dioxide, and light energy, which produces 6 oxygen, a molecule of organic compound. In this case, we use glucose, and then also 6 water molecules. So since you start off with 12 water molecules and then you make 6 more, we just eliminate, well, we reduce this to say that there's 6 waters and we don't put water on the other side. But just know that water is created doing chemiosmosis in photosynthesis. So the overall, the simplified chemical equation, your reactants are going to be both water and carbon dioxide. Now, I always write my water first because water is used in the light-dependent reaction, okay? The light-dependent reaction happens first. So you have water and carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is actually used in the Kelvin cycle. Your products are going to be oxygen, which is created in the light-dependent reaction, and a sugar, a simple sugar, monosaccharide, which is created during the Kelvin cycle. All right, now, this is what we call a redox reaction. This is a redox reaction, okay? And a redox reaction is simply an oxidation and a reduction, okay? So I just told you that these two happen in the light-dependent reaction. So water is essentially being turned into oxygen, right? And in the Kelvin cycle, we have carbon dioxide being turned into a simple sugar, a monosaccharide. Now, carbon dioxide is considered an inorganic source of carbon. We cannot use carbon dioxide as is. So carbon dioxide has to undergo what's called carbon fixation. So that is fixed into an organic carbon in this monosaccharide. Now, I started out talking about this being a redox reaction, right? And so we know that a redox reaction is oxidation and reduction. It's reduction and oxidation, okay? So if you can remember oil rig, I know you guys have had chemistry, but just in case, this is kind of a refresher. So oxidation is a loss of electrons, and reduction is a gain of electrons. So a lot of times students struggle with that concept because when you think reduction, you think loss. But in this case, we're talking about what's happening with the charges, what's happening with the electrons. So oxidation is a loss of electrons and reduction is a gain of electrons. Now let's look at this from a common sense approach, okay? So let's look at what's happening in the light-dependent reaction, or the LDR. So I started off with a compound that was composed of hydrogen and oxygen. And I ended up with a compound that's composed of only oxygen. So in this reaction, I lost all of my hydrogens. I no longer have my 12 hydrogens. All 12 of my hydrogens are gone. So since I no longer have my hydrogens, that means I also lost the electrons that were a part of the hydrogens. So there must have been a loss of electrons. So what does that mean? How I say this is water is oxidized to oxygen. Okay, so water is oxidized to oxygen. Now, common sense approach to this one. Let's look at what happens in the Kelvin cycle. I have carbon dioxide, which only contains carbon and oxygen, and that is being fixed into an organic sugar. That organic sugar contains, what's this? 12 hydrogens. Kind of looks like the 12 hydrogens that I lost from over here, right? So this process of the chemical reaction actually had a gain of electrons, right? Because I gained the electrons that came along with the hydrogens. So what that is telling me is that carbon dioxide is reduced to organic sugar. Carbon dioxide is reduced. So this is what we call a redox reaction, where there's a reduction and there is also an oxidation. This is a redox reaction, okay? So common sense, right? So what does that tell us? That tells us that the hydrogens that were once a part of water are now a part of the sugar that's created because they combine with carbon dioxide. Okay, so reactants, water and carbon dioxide, products, oxygen, and organic sugar. All right, so there's two stages of photosynthesis. Photosynthesis happens in 2 stages, and that's going to be video 2.